Welcome everyone. We'll get underway shortly. Just wait for people to come into our virtual space for this particular webinar. And once we've got that looking like it's growing there with the numbers, we can get underway. I'm Karen Bonanno from EduWebinar, and I'll be presenting this particular broadcast. I've got June Wall, a colleague who is going to be working in the background, helping to facilitate while I can focus on the session. And then we'll be able to get underway. So what I'm going to do first up is I will share my screen, and I just need to make sure I share the right one here. For this broadcast, what I will be doing is I will be working in this mode because I have a number of web pages that I want to go to, and it's just going to be a lot easier to go to those pages to share with you the information that I want to bring to you for this particular broadcast. So welcome to the Future Schools and Future Libraries broadcast. Just some basic housekeeping that we'll go through. So you are here in a listen only mode, and you do have your panel there that you can access where you'll be able to use the chat feature to post in any questions that you might have. There'll be a couple of times that I will stop throughout the broadcast to answer some questions, and I've just got June working in the background there as well, assisting in that so I can focus on the actual webinar. Post the webinar, there'll be a chance for you to provide some feedback and engage in a survey, and also there'll be an email that will go out, and it will have a certificate of attendance for you. It will also have a link to the slides so you can go back and see these again, and also a link to the recording. So we'll provide as much as we can, because for a disclaimer for EduWebinar, I do need to let you know that we don't give permission for any recording or capture, but you will be able to get access to the recording and to the slides post the broadcast. Also, the views and opinions that I'm sharing with you are mine, based on my experience and the research that I have done around this particular topic. And you will need to take this and consider how it applies to you in your particular workplace. Just a little bit of background to me. I am a qualified teacher and teacher librarian. I've worked with the state government departments as well as in private schools in the capacity of being an advisor, working at the state level, also working as an independent consultant, and now engaging in expanding then into being an educator within the Genius School movement, which I'll share with you as part of this particular program. I've been a founder of the EduWebinar, and in many respects, that has been over a decade now of providing virtual professional learning for people in the education community. So for this broadcast, what I'm going to be covering is these 4 areas, looking at the key drivers for future skills change. And this is not just looking at it in the sense of what it will be the impact for young people, but also for us as well. We have to be consciously aware that the pandemic has really put some aspects around education on steroids, and we need to be looking at this because the acceleration has increased in regard to some of the challenges around how education happens and how it's delivered, how students engage in that. As part of that, we'll look at critical skills for having people to be future ready. Again, not just students, but also ourselves. Looking at opening up a discussion around some of the scenarios for future schooling that have been advocated. And then lastly, looking at implications for school libraries. Taking this first part here, we are, as I said, engaging in a radically different future. There was a lot of conversation around education and the challenges, but in the last 12 to 15 months, with the sudden shift changing and happening, and how schools have had to embrace different learning spaces very quickly and efficiently, we're starting to see that there's a whole difference now around the impact that globalization is having for not only our economy, but also the state of being in regard to what's happening in schools and how we're delivering our education. So we've seen this rapid shift towards working remotely, and some of that has also been sustained. So we're not seeing people going back into workplaces. We're also seeing that some of the services that have been set up in school environments have been retained because there is this globalization, but also to understanding that we're going to be seeing that with the interconnectivity and the globalization, there's going to be a lot of outsourcing of jobs overseas. So what's going to be happening is for developed countries, there's going to be a higher level of competitiveness that's going to take shape here. And that means that we need to be really conscious of how we help our students to be able to be more connected and more capable to work in a global environment. And then if we look at the aspects here, we've got automation is kind of transitioning and making things extremely challenging for us, that we're going to have 90% of future jobs are going to be really automated to the point that employers now even are starting to look for the digital skills and also the digital literacy. In fact, they're willing to pay more for someone who brings those skills because of the fact that you're going to be working in a global environment, but you're also going to be working in a space where you're going to have to use those skills to be seeking and searching and sorting information and reporting and adding value. And because of this ever-changing process that goes on, people are going to have to be more agile in the way that they data mine and the way that they access information to then make decisions about how business will happen. So there is going to be this increased demand for entrepreneurial mindsets, entrepreneurial skills, enterprise skills for our futures. Then if we look here too, the last one I'm going to look at is this whole concept of flexible work. And we're seeing that reports have come out during the COVID of the impact that the pandemic has had, particularly on younger, early entry people into employment. So we're going to see this rising of the gig work for the whole economic recovery, which is going to impact sort of personal financial security for people as well. They may actually have to have more gigs or more part-time or more casual work to actually have a retaining of a lifestyle that they're interested in and that they've been able to maintain. What we're going to have here is, and it's going to be on an increase, is that there's going to be a higher percentage of people who are going to be in the workforce and engaging in flexible work. So what is that actually going to look like for ourselves, but also our young teens and tweens and teens going forward for their future? Because it will be a different working space for them in that context. So there will be this part-time, which will be regular work, which will be either ongoing. In other words, you'll be employed with one employer and you will be working for that one employer, or you'll be working for a fixed term on a part-time basis. And we're seeing for young people that they're having to undertake a number of jobs, particularly when it comes here to the casual work environment. There's the shift work, and that is all based then on the discretion of the employer. And we've seen the impact that that has had, particularly in the pandemic, where there's this on-off job relationship happening with young people and also even people in older age brackets that are finding that they have had to change industries even to actually retain work environments. Then there's the growth of the self-employed. And what we mean here is someone who has a small business and they are out there selling their time and their expertise. But being contract work, it means that it's not on a constant basis. It's kind of for a fixed term and it's ad hoc because people are contracting that person to undertake a particular project. Then we move into the gig work, where we've got this person who comes like bringing their portfolio of expertise and taking on gigs. So they're short-term projects that will only last for a certain period of time. They're also task, maybe even performance-based, and they're on demand. So we're seeing that there are different things that are unfolding, and we have to consider what are the skills that we need young people to bring, particularly given the context of things like globalization, automation, having impact on how people actually work. Now, if we look at some of the reports that have come out, and this is going pre-COVID now, and this report even though it's a 2017 report from the Foundation for Young Australians as part of their research series, a lot of the information here is still quite relevant, particularly when we look at the concepts of smart learning, smart thinking, smart doing. Looking at this part here that's saying the education system needs to prepare today's young people for these new work smarts in 2030. And it's probably even before 2030. Even ourselves, we know that we're spending more time on the job, even learning, engaging in an ongoing professional learning, engaging in online learning, whatever it may be, because we need to stay ahead of the whole changes that have happened. In fact, if we think about some of the stories that people may have shared with us, where schools had a strategic development that they were going to be moving into more virtual online by the end of, say, the end of 2020, a lot of schools found themselves having to accelerate and bring that forward at a faster pace, which meant there needed to be this pressure on people to be able to learn during that whole phase of that transition to the remote learning, distance learning, at-home learning, whatever it may be, the terminology that was used in your particular school environment. Then if we think about the smart thinking, this is where we see some of the particular skills emerging here that are going to be more in demand than they ever have been before. So it's really not a case of individuals needing to have rich content of the particular work they're going into, but having the transferable skills that they can bring to that environment. Here we see that they're indicating that there's going to be 100% more time at work solving problems. And in fact, when I talk to people in the entrepreneurial sector, they're indicating that it's more around not selling to people your product or your service or your program. It's actually solving a person's problem. And because we have this shift now, a number of people have gone into an online environment to deliver their products and programs and services, then you've got this flood of the market. And so the individual then is saying, well, okay, I need to be looking at purchasing something that is going to help me solve my problem, not necessarily buy the latest widget, gadget, or whatever it might be. Also, to the increase in the need for critical thinking and judgment. So it's needing to be able to be a critical thinker around identifying what needs to be produced, what needs to be created, so that it is addressing and solving people's problems. There's also the shift for the emphasis in the STEM, in the science, technology, engineering, and math skills are going to be on the increase as well, because to a certain extent with the automation we're going to be seeing things like robotics, we're going to be artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality. All of that is going to be starting to come into place and is even existing now in certain markets. And then of course there's this increase, in fact this is probably increased more, this need for people to develop effective communication skills, because you're going to be working in virtual environments like this, but also in other spaces and also across cultures. So it's understanding how to effectively communicate in a diverse cultural environment and to develop those interpersonal skills. So that is engaging in the whole smart thinking that our young people are needing to be embracing. And then the last part is then the smart doing. So it's great if you can have the learning, developing your knowledge, great to have your thinking, but then what are you going to do with it? And this is where the development and focus on an entrepreneurial mindset is starting to emerge within school environments. Even locally where I am in Brisbane, there are a number of schools that have indicated that what's happening is that students are now starting to come to the principal and say, we really need to look at how we can raise funds to be able to give back to our community, and how do we go about doing that? And so the schools have started programs which are helping kids to focus on that. So that's bringing in the entrepreneurial mindset, but the skills, but also to the focus on financial literacy and how students need to develop those particular skills. So we're seeing a shift that is happening. And it probably is going to be before 2030 that we're going to be needing to see more and more emphasis in this area. So just moving on here to some of the reports that have emerged in the last 12 months. This particular report is a pre-pandemic report, so published in January 2020, but it was focusing on the concept of schools of the future to embrace this fourth industrial revolution of what is needed, considering that we've got all these drivers bringing about a radical change in society. So for this part here in this section, I'm just wanting to focus on the skills component. And if you see here down this left-hand side, they do identify all the different skills that are grouped together. And for us, we might consider this concept of global citizenship skills in a different light. But for the World Economic Forum, they're looking at this whole concept is it's all about building a sense of social responsibility, of building awareness of the wider world and how we can be engaged in an active way in sustainability in our global community. So for us, we might be thinking more about the digital citizenship in the sense of digital literacy, but that tends to be covered off in this next section of innovation and creativity skills, where there is a need for people to be engaged in those higher order thinking capabilities to be able then to bring about innovation. And also here you'll see systems analysis. So that can be in two components. It can be the data analysis to be able to look at the trends and patterns that are happening throughout the world, or it could be getting systems to work smarter and more efficiently. But it's all about innovation and creativity that is happening there. And then the technology component is not just looking at the technology skills that are needed, but also the digital skills that are needed in that space and the digital responsibility. So that comes then to what we may be more familiar with of the global digital citizenship component in this section. And then growing more so now, and in particular, we've probably seen an emphasis on this in the last 12 to 15 months, is the need to be supporting young people for the development of their interpersonal skills, that whole sense of their self-awareness, their value, understanding their unique strengths, looking at this whole social emotional intelligence and what's involved with that. So understanding for themselves how they may function, but also how they may have empathy and be engaged in their communities in the same sense. So building a sense of social awareness and social responsibility. So these are the skills that are being identified by the World Economic Forum. And even now, this talk of Education 5.0 going well and truly beyond. So we might even explore some of that in a moment. But the thing that I wanted to focus on here was this is a kind of mid-pandemic review of the top skills that are needed. And as you can see here, they've grouped them into problem solving, self-management, working with people and technology. But you can see here that these skills are being even more refined than what they were, say, 12 months ago, where it's looking at not just critical thinking, but it's looking at the analysis that goes behind that. It's looking at creativity, but situated with that is looking at, well, what are the initiatives that are coming and where's the originality in that creativity that can bring about a better economic outcome as well as better well-being for the world around us. And it brings in here leadership as well, indicating that our young people should be able to step up and be leaders in this regard. Now, I see someone saying, needing to see this. Let me just see if I can bring this up here. This is from where the report is. And as I said, you'll have the slides. So they're indicating here that 50% of the population are going to have to need skills developed. Now, it may not be a little bit bigger to read here, but as I said, you'll get the slides. But here they're indicating these particular skills. And the interesting thing with this report is it's also having reference that there's an urgency for this skill development because of the changes that are happening within the world, that there's 4 to 5 months for engineering, cloud computing, 2 to 3 for data AI skills, 1 to 2 for the changes needed for the whole sort of interpersonal relationships and so forth. So we have to be kind of mindful and say, all right, if these are going to be the skills that are going to be crucial in 2025, how do they appear um, within our curriculums or within our syllabus or within, for us within Australia, we see probably a lot of this happening across curriculum area specifics like the technology design and programming, but we also see a number of these across the general capabilities. So if I go to the general capabilities site for Australia, previously we've probably had emphasis on the top 4 more so than some of these down the bottom here. But in recent times, it's probably more acutely aware that the personal and social capability is an area that is needing a little bit more focus now. Even schools who are indicating the transition back to the schooling environment in a full-time capacity, it works out that there's going to be a need for kids to be developing more self-awareness, to develop their self-esteem and their sense of self-worth. And then as part of that, then it's how they manage themselves in their developing their personal and social capabilities. Now, we can expose them to social awareness through social enterprise, but the crucial part is where are these kids? Where's their sense of self-worth right now? So our general capabilities within the Australian curriculum allow us to look at where some of these skills can be integrated into the program, and how we also work on some incremental learning programs to develop those skills with our students. So if you think about things like how do you build resilience and social and stress tolerance and flexibility, and that may be where there's an emphasis now on the social emotional intelligence component that needs to be in place and needs to be integrated and embedded throughout the curriculum. And for people, because this is a focus on the school library sector, consider how your school library also becomes a space and a place, even physically and virtually, where you can help to nurture that development in young people. So these are things that we need to be looking at. And so here, even in problem solving and ideation, it's bringing in here the sense of design thinking, which is possibly not something that is overly evident within our curriculum. And that's the challenge that we've got, is where do these skills sit within our curriculum? I think it's a case of we can see the capabilities, but if you go here, you can see some drop downs here, which will allow you to look at learning area specific advice. So explore where your curriculum is going, and then look at where you can be involved in this whole process of how you bring in the skills into your school community. Now, the interesting thing is there's research that's been asked for in regard to this. So education is embracing the need for being able to look at how we build in this increase of the knowledge and skills and attributes that young people are going to need. So here, this document, Future Ready Research on Incorporating Career Education into the Australian Curriculum. And it's really not just career education, it's that whole enterprise entrepreneurial mindset that young people are now going to need because of the impact that it's going to have on their working space. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop here at this mode. And I've just, if June, if there's any questions that we've got coming in.
Yes, I am monitoring them. There's just more comments, no questions as such at this point in time. We're just talking, Jodie is talking about the challenge of ensuring the general capabilities are within the curriculum.
Okay, all right. So I see some of you are having trouble reading the screen, but I'm going to stay in this mode because of the fact that I will need to be ducking in and out of websites over this next bit. But as I said to you, you will get the slides, so you will be able to go back and see these in your own time. So let's go back to the screen again, because I'm wanting to shift now into the whole concept of what we might mean by the future schooling scenarios that are beginning to emerge. So this particular document, and if I go here, it'll be a bit larger for you. This particular document by UNESCO was in March this year. And it's saying, well, 1 year on, what's happening with our education and what needs to take shape. So the writing will be a bit small, but they're indicating that we're still in closures. So there's still a few, 100,000 or more people are still in closures, which means we're going to be looking at education having to take on a different shape and form to continue to address the kind of flip-flop that is happening within the school environments. So this particular document here, it's talking about keeping schools open and supporting the teachers, dealing with the dropout. So what's the learning loss? What's the impact of that that's going to impact on the economy further down the track? And then looking at digital transformation. Now, the interesting thing is with this particular concept of digital transformation, the United Nations Deputy Secretary recently came out at an event and said that we are going to have to be looking at education differently. So the comment here, as we look to the future, it's clear that there is no going back to the education we had before. If we are to realise the ambition of the Sustainable Development Goal 4, quality education, then we need to pursue pandemic recovery efforts that will transform education. Now, the interesting thing that is emerging with all of the forums and coalition gatherings that they are having, they're starting to look at school structures. The traditional schooling system will not have the major majority of the schools of the future. They're reaching out to educational corporations such as the Khan Academy, Blackboard, Collaborate. There's a whole host of organisations that are out there who are providing digital services. And the emphasis is looking at that whole shift to a digital delivery, as well as maintaining the need to address any gaps so that we're not losing the learning process. So going back to this particular document, which is looking at over on the right-hand side now, it's looking at all the different pedagogical practices or experiential learning that is going to need to be in place. And so it's looking at the major headings: the personalised, self-paced learning, the inclusive learning, the accessibility of learning, problem-based, collaborative learning, and also it being student-centred. So one of the schools that is mentioned in the document as an example of a future school scenario is the Green School. And in the last 12 months or last couple of years, Green School has expanded now, where it's not just in Bali where it originated, it's now across a whole lot of other different areas. So if I go to their site here, let's see if I can get to that. So there's actually 4 locations now. There's the Bali, there is New Zealand, which opened this last 12 months. There's also Africa, and there's also in Mexico. Now, the component that they see that this particular school is looking at is indeed the global citizenship skills, where they're building awareness around the wider world and also sustainability and how these young people play an active part. And in fact, one of the outcomes that has come, a major global event that had happened, is these young people who developed the Bye Bye Plastic Bag movement, which is a global movement. So Malati and Isabel were students at the Green School Bali when they first started their project on the Bye Bye Plastic Bags. Now, of course, they're a little bit older now, and they're still working with the Bye Bye Plastic Bags to the point that this is now a global movement. And they have people throughout the world who are at events, they have projects that are happening, they have people who are connecting in from all different locations, they've got major corporate groups sponsoring. So this is where we start to see a huge difference when young people come in and start to develop their entrepreneurial mindset, which to a certain extent, the Green School Bali starts to develop. For a start, the whole school is built out of bamboo, so it's totally sustainable. They do have solar energy to power things like projectors and so forth. But for the majority of cases, for instance, their whiteboard, so you'll see a whiteboard here, it's actually a recycled windscreen or windshield. So the whole school is built around the sustainability component for a start. But then they do have an innovation hub, which again focuses on things that every classroom has a garden. The vegetables are then harvested and they're taken through the kitchen, and the students are fed. Now, the interesting thing is with Green School, it's a paid system. So people who want their kids to come to Green School, and they come from all around the world, the parents actually have to move to Bali for the duration of the time that their child is in school. And so the way that they give back to the local community is they have this recycling service. And so the kids from the village, if they come and contribute to the recycling, because again, the plastic bags was an initiative here, the whole recycling component is that they're encouraging their kids in the local villages to clean up their communities, bring the recycling to the Green School. And in return, the local kids can attend the Green School and get their education. So they're learning all different things here. So you can hear they're recycling the bikes, using the bamboo to build the frames. This is their hydroponics. This in particular is they go around and they collect the cooking oils from the restaurants, and they turn it into a biogas that fuels their school bus, but also producing these offshoots of candles and so forth. So these kids are involved in that whole innovation process, but they also have what they call a creative hub. And in their creative hub, they're learning how to develop their higher order thinking capabilities to address the United Nations sustainable goals. So around this learning hub, they have all of the goals, and they have them under particular themes, but they also have activity cards. So here you can see a new Green School toilet, but the toilet is all designed around so that it is organic, natural, sustainable, the glycerin purification, electric bike pickup. All of these activities are created by the students, and they're also then developed so that they're implemented by the school. So that's just one example of how we're seeing a change in the different school scenarios. So with this document from the World Economic Forum, it's designed to open up conversation, not necessarily saying that these are the exact school scenarios or the exact school frameworks that we will see emerging, but more a case of let's have a look at these. Let's see if they're plausible. Let's see what the impact is. And of course, the pandemic triggered a lot of this and sort of pushed the agenda along in many ways. So in looking at these, because the text is rather small at that image, but the schooling extended model is really, as it says here, things really are remaining fairly unchanged. So they're what we're familiar with, where we have students participating in year levels, taking various assessments, standardized testing, addressing the common curriculum that's there. Academic certification is the main pathway to success. And then the only spin would be that we're starting to possibly engage with international partners. Now, that may be international providers of digital learning environments and platforms, both from a public and private sector. For the teachers, the impact there is that with the changes that are taking place, it may be that more personalised learning is starting to alter the way that we work. And of course, that will impact on the type of professional learning. So as I said, there's an emphasis and a shift and more content and documentation that is emerging around the social emotional intelligence of the young learners. So what happens here when they talk about diversification, it's all around people being able to bring their expertise and their skill to a school environment for how the school will continue to develop. But the schooling extended is really a case of to a certain extent, business as usual. So it's a known, it's conservative, it's suffering a bit of inertia, but it's already there. But with the movement to engaging international partners, then it may well be saying, well, okay, what is working, what is scalable as we step into the future? But also, too, the international component is looking at we are into a globalization society. We are also into a mobile society whereby people are moving around and want to be able to access education wherever they are. The next scenario they talk about is kind of just sort of blowing things out then. So this is where we see that education being outsourced, and in many respects, it's being driven by parental request and response. And the technology, the digital technology is also driving it. So we're seeing the emergence of things like homeschooling, tutoring, online learning, community-based, so hubs forming where young people who may not have engaged well with the traditional schooling format, but have really emerged in the shift to the remote learning, the homeschooling, all of that. Those kids are now possibly families, and there's reports and news reports around families who have continued to shift with that into a space where they're actually accessing programs for their kids to be able to learn at home. So to a certain extent, it's going to be market driven, and the emphasis will be on the virtual schooling environment. So the traditional structures that we see are going to shrink away because we're going to see that people are going to engage more in the flexibility of learning. So it's not going to be around age specific or even year level groupings. Kids are going to be able to go at their own pace and actively involve in the learning. Now, what implication that has then on the teaching is that there's going to be more people involved in contributing to the outsourcing. There are going to be digital platforms that are going to provide the services. There are going to be people who are needing to come in who will maybe come from an industry background. So we're seeing this at the bottom here, this licensed flexible expertise will begin to emerge as they engage in outsourcing of education. And the scenario they indicate here is even in this space, there's still going to be that kind of student-teacher relationship or role in the programs, because there's going to be more the leading learner concept, and also the actual learner, the young learner, may also be leading the learning because of that flexibility of how they engage. To a certain extent, we'll see a bending and breaking of the rules when it comes to education being outsourced to be able to give kids a greater opportunity. Then the school is learning hub. So this is kind of the expanded out, but now it's shrinking back in is another model that they indicate, that people become more focused on what is happening within connecting the school to the community. And so it's combining the learning, civil engagement, and also it's looking at the social innovation. So to a certain extent, schools may retain their functions, but it's a reschooling, but more in a learning hub, a more closed community basis. So it becomes more targeted and focused rather than expanded. And what happens here is, because that is in, people are going to be engaging in different models of learning, which may be more passion interest based, it will become more student focused and driven. So it will be based on things like teachable moments, more flexibility, a core essential curriculum, not an expanded crowded curriculum, because it's going to be focusing more on what is the kind of local needs and local requirements. And the implication here for educators is people who are going to be engaging in this community are going to have strong pedagogical practice, because they will be creating some of the curriculum. They'll be creating it, or they'll be co-creating it to align with what is the actual community needs, and the designing the kind of pathway. So the traditional pathway of going through different year levels and then going into vocational education or university, that's probably going to come unstuck. Young people are going to find that they're going to be learning at their own pace, and some will be faster. And so they'll be engaging in, say, an entrepreneurial world before it would be traditionally in place. And so we're also going to see that there's going to be a need here for specialists to be in these hubs to be able to develop those particular pathways that the students will engage in. And then the last one is really being driven by the artificial intelligence. In other words, teaching is really not going to be as we know it. There will be an artificial intelligent assistant who will be based on how you're interacting with the learning platform. It will then guide you. It will then indicate that this is the next stage of your development. This is the course or the micro course you will undertake. These are the skills that you need to develop now. This is the mentor with whom you need to connect within this digital learning space. So this will actually go well and truly beyond any age barriers. It will go from young people in even early childhood on a play-based curriculum right through to people who are in their latter years of life who are still engaging in that learning space. So we're going to see that the existing structures that we know are pretty well going to be liberated and be used in other means. So the personal assistant that you'll have through that artificial intelligence is going to guide your learning. And so what happens here, we're going to be all engaging in learning constantly. As I said earlier on, that the increase in learning on the job is going to be more in place. So people are going to have to dip into these micro courses, micro programs, rather than the traditional degree, which is over a number of years. So these are the different learning scenarios that, that have emerged. Now, just as an example for myself, I've become more engaged in the junior school education movement, which has a strong virtual platform and is also around gearing into starting, first of all, with the area of self-awareness, self-expression, and then moving into self-mastery. And it works around a play, project, and purpose-based curriculum that is embedded with inquiry-based learning. So at the moment, it's all virtual, but in 2022, the first physical Genius School will open. Now, how that came about is through a group of people who are entrepreneurs who form the Genius U group. And these entrepreneurs were talking and sharing about how education needed to change. And they were kind of saying, well, let's see what happens. But when things didn't happen, they ended up forming the Genius School. And so this is where we've got some of these different future school scenarios beginning to emerge. So first of all, it started off looking at sort of the extended schooling with partnerships with private and corporate groups, but it's now starting to move in education outsourced and school as a learning hub. So some of the programs are based around just small learning hubs of groups of students at a global level, connecting and learning and going beyond the normal school curriculum. So the principles that drive that to a certain extent are a little bit similar to the green school concept. So here we can see it tends to be in a humanistic approach to learning, where there's the philanthropic area, where you're looking at the self-mastery, tapping into what your interests are, what you're capable are, being purpose-driven, developing leadership through the effective communication and relationship, interpersonal, looking at the life skills, so bringing in a core curriculum without it being crowded, and then allowing them also to engage in sort of the arts and humanities area as well. And then the philosophy component is building the skills, research, decision making. So the students are working to be independently discovering and taking their journey, but big emphasis on entrepreneurship. In fact, one of our programs, we had one young person who has finished school legally of their legal age, and the parents have now taken them out of school and they are developing their own enterprise and businesses. So we're looking at technology as well, bringing in all of that component, and the global citizenship. It's very similar to the actual Genius School movement. So there's all different scenarios that are developing here for the way that things are beginning to emerge for the schools. Now, I'm just going to do a stop share again, June, if there's any questions or even any comments that have come through for that area.
Let me just see what I've been taught. A lot of the conversation has been about how the learning that we're looking at today or tonight, it can be shared, and how that evidence base for change can be developed. A lot of discussion is around the interdisciplinary nature of what Green School and places like that are talking about. And then Chris has actually suggested that there's an aspect to the document or the work that we've been looking at that's missing. And that aspect is blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And I was just about to reply to Chris about where I see blockchain working, but you might like to have a comment, Karen.
Well, if I go back to, let me go back to the screen again. If I look at this aspect here, and also because it is being driven by entrepreneurs, the whole cryptocurrencies is becoming part of how we're addressing these enterprise and learning the financial literacy in a different context, that it's not as we know it before. In fact, right at the moment, the Genius U group of entrepreneurs are holding what they're calling an Investor 5 micro school, and it's all about the cryptocurrencies. So this is where we're seeing external corporate groups are coming in and participating in education and teaching people in different ways to go beyond the traditional way that we approach even education, but also investment, also sales, also communication. So they're looking at the whole change and shift that's needed so that there is more engagement at all levels. And okay, so sorry, June, yeah.
Can I just add one answer to that as well? And I think that the whole issue of the technologies behind blockchain, that actually travels very nicely into that whole notion of micro-credentialing. So that, I think it is part of the background of it. Sorry, Karen, go on.
Yeah, no, definitely. And micro-credentialing will probably start to overtake the formal structures that we've had, where you are dedicating 5 years of your life to undertake a degree. People are going to dip in at their point of need, that last one about, learn as you go. So the implications, and I will just alert people, I may go over time here a little bit, because I do want to look at what are the implications then. So this was one quote that sits with me, and I refer to it for myself on a number of occasions when I'm thinking, well, where am I going? What am I doing? And this is Loretta Lynn, who is a country and western singer-songwriter. And she says, you've either got to be the first, the best, or different. So when we think about implications of all of this for what's going ahead, so just to cover quickly these. So the 4 that I picked was accessibility, flexibility, responsiveness, and resilience. Now, in case you didn't see any of the broadcasts that we did last year, I'll just go here. This is a link that will be included in the slides, so you can go to them. But we did a whole series, and this is just a recent one that I've uploaded, where Helen talks about the way that she moved from sort of the pandemic to post-pandemic. So that's just a recent edition. So if you haven't seen that one, you might want to check in on that particular program. But throughout all of those series that we looked at these particular aspects. So when it comes to accessibility, we have to be willing to look at how we provide the resources in a post-pandemic or even in a transition, depending on where you are, because there are still schools throughout the world who are in lockdown. So we saw things being quite creative and innovative with curbside pickup, or providing resources to students in different formats, of even doing care packs, all those sorts of things. So we need to, from a school library perspective, we need to say, well, how do we make things accessible so that no student misses out on this whole process? And even with our services, a lot of people did a lot of curation of services. So are you going to continue them, or are you going to disband them? And even with the programs, are you going to be looking at providing these short micro-credential type of programs that will help students, that can help them beyond just the formal processes of learning that they may have on a day-to-day, but what they might engage in after school or outside of school hours? And then looking at the concept of what you're doing in regard to personal type of work that you're looking at for kids, or whether it's group. So what type of programs do you have in place? And the whole thing is, the school library, even though it may have been and may still be the case that the school library isn't a place where all the kids can come back to. They may be coming in small groups, or you may be lucky. I mean, in Australia, we have the ability to have larger groups, but it's a bit of an on-off. We've just recently had a lockdown in one of the states. So we have to be consciously aware that we need to have this range and variety of different services, as different resource accessibility, so that we are actually supporting both the students and the staff and the parents with what we're doing. So think about all the different things that you're doing to create accessibility. Then there's also the flexibility. So not just the flexibility in a physical space, in that we can move things around. And you've probably all heard about the watering hole, the cave, and the campfire. So it's just really using those spaces to create the different environments in which learning can take place, and where student engagement is even more so. In a virtual, we've all been down that path of how we're working in different virtual environments, and how we engage the learners by shifting the energy, by having short, sharp bursts of activities, having online and offline. So all of these things, we need to be flexible and not rigid in the way that we're working with kids. Also to personnel. So it's, what we saw is some people may have been redeployed out of the library into the classroom, and the library actually became a classroom. So it's a case of, I always believe that you can't take, once you're a teacher librarian or a library media specialist, or whatever the terminology is for your area, you're stuck with it. It's there with you. And so you will carry those skills that you have developed into an out of library environment as well. But also consider how you would tap into the skills. And we saw teams within school libraries incorporating all the different levels of qualified people and unqualified people, to look at how we can be addressing the needs of our students when we're traveling through these uncertain times that the pandemic creates. So that's why I'm saying here, be flexible, break the rules, but within reason. So you may have had a strategic operational plan, but you may have had to break those rules because it wasn't possible to deliver that plan, or to deliver to those operational aspects. You may have had to also extend the library loans and give kids more than the usual practice of X number of books over X number of weeks. You may have embraced social media using YouTube or Vimeo, or even social media platforms, to stay connected with your community and with your staff and with your students. You may have even had to establish small classroom libraries. So there's all different things. Allow that flexibility to go on, review, so that you don't go back, and we won't actually go back to where we were when it comes to our particular environments. Then the next one is responsiveness. So as I said, there's been this increase in emphasis on the social emotional learning, but also responding to the reading needs and also the research needs. That might be in the type of things, whether they're short courses, whether there are virtual pathways, whether you're developing resource lists. So it might be you creating that to support the staff or the students, or whether it's a co-creation exercise, and also the new services that you might have brought in. So it may be that some of you started online book clubs, or you did some podcasting, or you did some virtual storytelling, so that kids could, if they didn't have books at home, they could listen to the read aloud, and you made that available through certain media channels. Or you may have even, with the community, looked at certain care packs or curriculum packs, but also having fun. One of my presenters last year, Belle Cameron, shared how she used Padlet to build fun in for her community, so they could feel that they were part of what was happening for the school. And they had these little mini challenges and competitions that students could be engaged in. Even though they weren't at school, they could still engage in the competitions and the challenges that were set up. And then they would also be able to still join virtually with their classmates and in their particular year levels to have this competition. So it became a whole school exercise. So in many respects, the responsiveness of the school library profession during this past 12 to 15 months has actually probably raised a profile in the way that you were able to quickly pivot because of the skills and also the tools and resources that you already had planned, and you just basically tweaked them up. And then the last part is the resilience. And it has been fairly maybe deflating or challenging of things that have happened over the last 12 to 15 months. You may have found that you were redeployed, or you may have found that your budget was cut. But there are different things that we need to develop. And because, resilience is being able to withstand the adversities and the challenges and being able to bounce back, because these are things that you can set in place to build your resilience. So the first thing is, creating some sense of certainty. Set yourself some intent, maybe developing a future vision that is personal as well as professional. Maybe if you don't do future vision, maybe setting some, sort of hairy, audacious goals of what you want to achieve over this next 12 months as you transition back to whatever the new normal might be. And then as a result of that, you're committing to developing your competencies. Today or last week, I got an email from the Australian Standards AITSL group, and they were outlining how we can supercharge our professional learning in the different environments. And so they've opened up different pathways that people can engage. So it could be, online learning, professional conversations, reading, school visits, if you can organise those. Those can be even virtual if need be, engaging at professional association level, looking at online professional learning, looking at team teaching, all of these things that are opening up now to say that that can be all part of how you can engage in professional learning for yourself. And as a result of that, you start to expand your networking communities so that you can be connected with people either through social media or through different network platforms. And you may even be able to engage in either being a mentor or being a mentee. So there's all different ways that we can contribute collaboratively. And in most cases, a lot of people often say that it's the school library profession that actually modeled that collegial process of how they communicate. And one exhibition of that is the AusTL discussion list. I've had a number of colleagues say that that list has been ongoing, but it's always continued to host the sharing of people of what they're doing in their communities and what they're doing in their schools. So just keep this little motto in mind, little mantra. For you, you've got to be the first, or you've got to do your best, or you've got to be different. So what you can do is you can kind of do some self-reflection for yourself based on what has been shared in this particular broadcast, or what you may even be journeying through yourself. So you can do that. Or what you might want to do is access the Future Ready Librarians site, where they have a number of different resources. And I might just bring up, let's see if I can bring this across. so that I can see it here. It's probably a little bit easier. But this you can download from their site, and it may give you some hints to say, well, okay, let's look at what each of these elements and components are, and what are the key words and what are the descriptors that sit behind it, which then can prompt us to say, well, what areas of this do I need to look at if I'm going to build my capabilities and my competence. So you can go to that site and engage in some of the material that is there, but be aware that it has a strong American focus for what's involved and what you would be finding. Then here I've got some reading, and it may be that you might think, well, why have I got 2013, 2014? Well, the interesting thing is when I went out and I did a search, this was what I could find publicly. And it's probably a concern that I would express is that material that would be useful for advocating the change and the shift that would be needed and the implications for the profession are hidden behind subscription services or by membership sites. So I think we need to really look at how we make sure that whatever we may be writing or co-creating or sharing that has a message that can go out there, then we need to look at making sure that we can access the resources that will be informative. Now, even though this is a 2013 resource, the content in there still has relevance for what we're talking about for this particular broadcast. And then there's the SCAN journal, which is a New South Wales journal, but also it has Australia-wide implications, and it's a open public, so it's a free access here that you can go and find that. Then, of course, I can do a little bit of a plug for EduWebinar itself. So just even looking at the webinars coming up to try and align with some of these future-ready librarian elements that you see. June's going to be coming and doing something on information fluency. And then going down to another webinar looking at the whole book creator events, how you can have literature festivals, whether they be face-to-face or virtual, and Jenny Stubbs is going to come and share that. So there's different ways, and what I'm going to offer just as a close off here is if you are interested and you're finding that some of the material here in this Future Ready component starts to stimulate your thinking, then I'm giving an opportunity that you can book a kind of speed strategy call with me to go through some of the elements. And so what it is, if you, I'll include the click in this link in a follow-up email, but it's really a simple process. It's not going to ask you too much at all. It's going to ask you to identify which of these areas from the Future Ready Librarians is important to you. And then from that, which is a priority, and then also some information about the biggest challenge you have, and then anything else that you might be able to provide. And then once you submit that, there'll be a pop-up which will have a link to where you can actually book that call and be able to connect in for this 30-minute free speed strategy call. And of course, my request to you is a commitment that you'll actually show up when you book that particular call. So all of this information will go out to you within the next 24 hours so that you can come back and revisit and have access. As I said, the certificate will go out, and also you'll be able to get access to the recording and the slides. So just in summary, we've covered off on a few things, and I've gone at a bit of a pace to do that, but I wanted to make sure that we covered a lot of the material that has significance for us in the profession to be able to say, well, how are we addressing the future ready need of the skills that our young people are going to need? So I'm just going to stop sharing there. And June, if there's any questions or any comments that you'd like to share that people have been putting in place during the chat.
Yes, I think there are a few that I'd just like to share. One was specific to Western Australia, but I think it's pertinent to everybody, no matter where you are. And that was around how you introduce the idea of entrepreneurial learning and the future ready learning, etc., within the constraints of the final year of school requirements, which in some states is exams, some states is specific types of assessments or uni entrance. So that was a question.
Okay, what I'm going to do is just share screen and just go back. Let me see if I can find this. Yeah. So this is the virtual Genius School. And so when we come down to looking at our Young Entrepreneur Academy program, it runs over 4 weeks and it's a micro school. So it is kind of an after hours, and it's a 1 hour commitment Monday to Friday over the 4 weeks. So we've had young people join in after their school day, or in some cases working across 3 time zones. It might be early morning. And we try to hold these during the vacation times that align with different time zones. And so this is where we're adding this as an addition to what may already be in the school space. But it's really designed around getting young people to develop their enterprise skills as well as their future ready skills that I've talked about. That in this case, it's after 4 weeks being able to launch their own business. And the success rate that we see here is very high. We have a high participation rate. We have a high turn-up rate. We have also a high outcome rate. And as I shared with you, a couple of our graduates from the Young Entrepreneur Academy have now actually gone into business. With one child, their parent pulled them out of school. They were of legal age, so they're 15, but they now have a business and it's going well, and they're about to start their second business. And in starting their second business, they're linking up with other young graduates from the academy. So this is kind of these the sort of micro course, micro credentials that are being developed that go outside of a school environment. And then another one that we're launching is the Teen Quest, which is all about developing the higher order thinking skills. And again, it's going to be outside of the normal school hours. And as I said, we get the kids are turning up, which is quite amazing to consider that they've done a school day and then they come and they engage in an hour and they're mentored. So we have a smaller group. So they're mentored by successful people who have been in business. And they also have implementation sessions where it's a more personalized small group learning. So it brings in some of those different future school scenarios of how we engage with the kids.
Thanks, Karen. Another one from Jennifer, who is sort of talking about, the whole challenge of the teacher-TL partnership and that tension, I suppose, between how you actually meet traditional outcomes within the innovative context of what we're talking about. So it's just a comment along that. And I think you've probably answered that in the sense that it's a lot of work to start off with and you can build it in, but it just takes time. And it really leads into the last comment that I'd like to share that came out of the chat, and that is that risks and changes need to be encouraged. And I think that probably says it all.
Absolutely. And that's why when I said before, in developing your resilience is building in some certainty for yourself. And, as I said, the flexibility is there as well. So being flexible, bend and break the rules, be willing to shift. And that's something that we've had to do very rapidly in this last 12, 15 months. But be willing to stay with it. I mean, any of these young people who are going into their businesses, they're starting small, but they have the ability now to actually grow faster than someone like myself, who's been in small enterprise for a number of years. Well, actually since 1994. And so what happens is that when you start something, you're not going to get immediate success overnight. You're going to have to stick with it. And that's part of being resilient. You stick with it because you believe that this is what you need to be doing at this time. And you will also, the interesting thing is working in a virtual environment, it's much easier to tweak something and change it up than if you're working in a space where there has to be the physical resources and the physical bricks and mortar and whatever else. So I'd encourage you, if you're going to be adding any sort of additional support programs for groups or students, or even for staff, if you're looking at professional learning for staff, is use the virtual environments to be able to engage them in that way.
I think that's about it. A lot of the conversation, it's gotten really active in the last part, so it's really good. It's people are basically have found it very thought-provoking, and are just now sort of sifting through the ideas as to what they'll do next.
Great. All right. So that's why I'd encourage you to book that strategy call, because that's where we'll do a speed plow through, getting you focused, looking at all of those things about, the accessibility, flexibility, resilience, being responsive in the light of what I've shared. So thank you very much for giving up your time, whether it be morning, evening, afternoon, or wherever you're located, because I know we have got folk from around the world joining us for this particular broadcast. And for those of you who didn't make it and are listening to the recording, the offer is also there for you as well to pick up that strategy call. And thank you, June, for supporting me in the background there to help facilitate the broadcast.
Not a problem. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Okay, bye.